And a lot has happened. Um, it's difficult to know what to choose first, especially since our president has now asked Congress for what is it called, an AUMF or something like that, an advanced. I can't remember what the AUMF stands for, but it's permission to send. I didn't think he had to send permission, but unless it's a prolonged effort, but. I suppose he wants to for other reasons anyway.
Yeah.
But it's not really clear what he would be doing. Anyway, I thought that probably what we're dealing with at the moment is suddenly the clash of civilizations has reappeared with what the terrible shooting in the University of North Carolina, and now this. High-level decision to use military force against the Islamic State, and I don't really see how it's going to be possible to do that. But in the announcement that I saw, it says that 60 nations are allied with the U.S. to do this.
Mm-hmm.
That's a large number.
Yes.
That's nearly a third of the world.
That's a lot better than the coalition of the willing.
Yes. Um, so I suppose that we're going to have to wait some time to see what happens with that. But the incident in North Carolina, I thought it was interesting that there's a lot of disagreement and annoyance about the problem of whether it was a parking problem or a hate crime. And this sort of thing has not been such a problem in this country as it has been in some parts of Europe, especially England, where political correctness has become, what should I say, very much promoted throughout the country. And people have to be very careful what they do in order not to be accused of I don't know that the term hate is used all the time, but anyway, they're supposed to make concessions in order to make immigrants feel at home.
Mm-hmm.
And the immigrants don't seem to be expected to make any concessions to be at home.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I wonder whether that sort of thing may spread or not.
Well, I think the fact that it was a triple homicide, which is unusual in itself, is really what attracted the most attention. Whether it's determined to be a dispute over parking tickets or whether it's a hate crime. I mean, let's face it, anybody who kills three people is far from normal. And if he had embarked upon a vendetta of killing Muslims, he presumably would have gone after a bigger game than killing three people in an apartment. I don't know. I think that, as I say, a triple homicide is something that attracts attention even in New York City or Los Angeles.
Well, I think it's very unlikely that it was anything other than a hate crime, but it's interesting that there was a big effort to interpret it as something different from a hate crime.
That's a good point.
And I wonder how long that will last, because if it was understood generally that hate crimes happen, it would have a big effect on a lot of things in the way inter-ethnic relations
Sure.
are evaluated in this country.
Well, can we talk a little bit about the biggest hate crimes? All right. Can we talk a little bit about the actions of ISIS or ISIL, whichever you prefer? Which
But
are,
they're all they're international, aren't they?
well, yeah, I think I was struck by two things. Obviously, the burning of the Jordanian pilot and the subsequent killing, whether it was a murder or accidental bombing of the American 26-year-old woman. And then, obviously, the next step that the president took was to request the authorization under the War Powers Act. And then the other thing I noticed, which we exchanged emails about, is that Office of Joint Intelligence Assessment or some such organization, which is a government body in the United States, says that there are 24,000 ISIS fighters located in this one geographic area in western Syria and eastern Iraq, of which 4,000 apparently come from the West. And then so I mean, it just leads me to think that if the president is going to get the authority from Congress, which he's going to get, I'm certain, and if there are 59 other nations allied with this effort, and if there are 24,000 of these lunatics in one small place relatively, I don't think that that bodes particularly well for them, for ISIS.
And in Belgium, the court case that was rather unusual for Europe, reminiscent of what's been going on in Egypt, that number of people being accused of a crime. But yes, I suppose one can't really separate the national from the international, but it is something new in this country. The Islamic State seems not to be expanding at all, and seems not to have expanded at all for several months. And one wonders whether that, on the one hand, will make it easier for the West to deal with, whether it's influencing its decisions to the way it deals with prisoners, and what else is going on the ground there. It's very difficult to tell what's going on the ground because we have very little relationship with Assad, although the BBC did an interview with him yesterday.
Well, I saw the headline on that, but I didn't know that he. But did he say anything of note, or was it the usual?
Not anything that I heard that was of note, but I thought it was rather amazing that the BBC managed to broadcast an interview with him. And we haven't heard any more recently that I've seen in the news about what's actually going on in Iraq. So we have very little information about what's going on the ground there. And our attention, of course, is still, the news is still full of the negotiations between Iran and the West, and it's being made more and more. The news makes it sound more and more likely that there will be no agreement by the deadline, and that will be the final deadline. But I suspect that even if that happens, and if it does happen, that things will continue to happen anyway without the negotiations.
Yeah, I think things were happening before the negotiations.
Yeah.
It may be that an interregnum in the negotiations may allow things to happen again. Can I just go back? I think that a lot of what's happening, I suspect that ISIS overplayed their hand with the burning of the Jordanian pilot, and then later, whether they intentionally did it or allowed it to happen, the killing of the woman. And I think that much as we always talk about how globalization is spreading information and allowing reactions to occur in communities where they really historically hadn't been as prevalent before because of the increased communication and increased population, I think it's beginning to go in another direction as well now. I think that we're going to begin to see reaction in the West, in the non-Islamic world, from people who are lashing out against, quote, all Muslims because of what they see is going on. And I think that does not bode well.
Well, I have thought for a long time that is likely, but I would have expected it to start happening sooner in Europe. And so far, very little, in fact, has happened in Europe, despite things like Charlie Hebdo.
Well, you have to remember that the Europeans, from a larger perspective, don't have access, so to speak, to private firearms like they do here. So there are a lot of people in this country with guns, and there are a lot of people in this country that can be influenced, rightly or wrongly, by the media and by the sub-media, whatever you want to call it. And it may be that what happened in North Carolina was one of those people. And if that's the case, I'm surprised that he was the first one, and I don't think he's going to be the last one by a long stretch.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I mean, I can remember after 9/11, anybody with any sanity was embracing the Islamic communities around the country, saying that these are good people. We can't condemn them all because of fringe elements, et cetera, et cetera. And I think we're going to see that again. But if I'm a Muslim living in the United States, every time there's a beheading or something going on by ISIS, I mean, I'm shaking my head. It's not a good thing. And the same being a Muslim in Europe.
Hmm.
And apparently it's the same being a Muslim in the Middle East, who all pretty much unanimously came out condemning the actions of the
Yeah.
burning of the pilot.
Yes. Um, the other thing in the news today, which is not entirely unrelated, is Prince Charles in Saudi Arabia,
Yes.
um, making a point and having it reported that he made the point of the human rights problem in Saudi Arabia, and the fact that he apparently has a history of good relations with the Saudi royal family.
Yeah. There was
Which,
there was a big article in the Times of London on Monday
oh, really?
that I read when I was over there.
Uh-huh.
And they were talking about how he does in fact have excellent relations with the Saudi royal family. And the article went on to claim that he essentially functions despite the prince's charity and his concern about charitable things and human rights. What he does is essentially functioning as an arms merchant for the British armaments industry. And the article went through several visits to Kuwait, to Oman, to the UAE, to Saudi Arabia, in which big British contracts had been hung up, and he went to visit. And then by the time, shortly after he left, the contracts then went through and were executed. And the prince's staff hastily was issuing denials, saying there's absolutely no connection at all. He doesn't discuss armaments with the king, and blah, blah, blah. But it was a big headline, Charles, Merchant of Death, that kind of thing.
Anyway, part of the reason why I bring that up is that I think that because of globalization, the fact that everybody has information about everything that's going on everywhere, one has to see the Islamic State in the larger context of the Middle East, and there's so much else going on that is new, extraordinary, and very difficult for us to understand where it's leading to. Sisi and his efforts to control things in Egypt, the relationship between Sisi and the new king in Saudi Arabia, Salman, which is not clear yet, but is obviously different from what it was with his predecessor. Similarly with the heads of state in the Gulf states, and the situation in Afghanistan and Pakistan, because the Islamic State has been appearing to have a cell that's becoming active in Pakistan, but every few days we hear news of that, and then it disappears again. So it's not really clear whether it is actually happening. And of course, Libya is also in more and more. Everything's more and more uncertain in Libya.
Right, right.
So all the way from Libya to Afghanistan, where the new president looks good, but difficult to see that he's actually achieving anything so far.
Well, he's much more welcoming to the American military, and there's been a significant uptick in U.S. Special Forces night raids, which he has allowed to be reinstituted, whereas Karzai had stopped them.
Karzai was an Afghan who'd lived only in Quetta, outside of Pakistan, whereas Ashraf Ghani has a PhD from Columbia, and is as American as he is Afghan.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, that's an enormous change, and very good for the relationship between Afghanistan the Afghan government and the US, but the test is going to be to see whether he can maintain his popularity in
Yeah,
Afghanistan.
yeah, it sure will. Yeah, yeah,
And in a way, the fact that he's allied with Abdullah, who's in effect the prime minister, is very good because Abdullah is representative of exactly the part of the population that Ashraf Ghani can't claim to be immediately supported, directly supported by.
hmm. Well, that's why in the U.S. they pick running mates. They always look for people who can attract the opposite
Yeah,
constituents.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah. And this is purely accidental.
purely accidental indeed. What did you
Uh,
think of the announcement this morning that peace might have broken out in Ukraine?
Um, well, I think it's extremely interesting, especially the picture of Merkel and Hollande almost hugging each other at the end of it.
Yes.
Um, I, I'm doubtful, I must say, and everybody seems to be saying that the decision sounds good, but we're not sure how it's going to play out
Hmm.
because I just don't see how it's. I don't think that Putin is entirely responsible for what's going on, even though it may please him and he may support it. I don't think it's entirely his doing. And I don't think that the European policy towards it is the most likely to succeed, simply because for Russia, this is the equivalent of what Kennedy had to deal with in just to the south of the United States
Right, right.
in the
Yeah.
early 60s.
Except for the fact that they've already annexed the Crimea. So I
But
don't.
the Crimea was
Yeah, that's true.
taken from the Ottomans by Catherine the Great.
That's true. That's true.
Uh,
That's true.
so, I mean, that's the sort of thing that there should be more public recognition
Yeah.
of, I think.
Yeah. As
Uh,
we've discussed here, there's a terrible lack of awareness of history in this issue.
yeah.
So
But I think that everything in the way the world is changing today, especially as the rate of change continues to accelerate, requires us to know more about how we got to where we are today and look back further in order to get that understanding. So,
well, I'll tell you a funny story to close. You'll know one of the names. Paul McCartney from the
mhm,
Beatles
mhm,
was participating in a video in which he sang a duet, a modern duet with one of the African American rappers. And I did not listen to it, but apparently it was phenomenally well done. And the African American rapper, I don't know who it was, like L Cool J or one of those guys. I don't know. I don't follow I don't follow the rappers, but nevertheless, this fellow, the rapper, put it out on YouTube and on his Twitter account. And the avalanche of comments he got ranged from things like, "Yo, wow, this Paul guy is going to go places. Where'd he come from? Who is he?" And like, people were like, "Who is Paul McCartney?" I mean, come on, but there's a whole group of people that follow
uh,
popular music that don't know him.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I'm sure you could say the same about Beethoven or Mozart, but yeah. And so if you just extrapolate that into what we're talking about,
Yeah,
nobody
yeah,
nobody knows anything.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
very dismaying.
Uh.
So they need to watch this program. Yeah.
Well, we'll see what happens in the next 7 days.
Yes, you're on. All right, Brian. Thank you very much.
Hey,
All right.
bye.
Bye.